people trickle in. Okay, so there's going to be, I mean, there are going to be quite a few more people joining us. I think people will just trickle in as time goes, but let's get started. So, hi, well, thank you for joining this discussion on housing, including local ballot housing propositions, with some talk about related topics such as homelessness, transportation, and parking. Housing is an especially big topic now because of the state's mandates, which I'm sure our panel will address. The city is and will be going through changes. So you should know what's going on. My name is Paulina Fayer. I'm a lead of Activ8SF. Oh, sorry. Do we want to mute like a couple of the people? Okay, so I'm a lead of Activ8SF, a nonpartisan neighborhood group of activated neighbors in District 8, which covers Diamond Heights, Snowy, the Castro, Glen Park, and Mission Dolores. Oh, and newly Noe Valley. Did not forget you. By nonpartisan, I mean that we welcome Democrats, which I am, Republicans, no party preference, and D8 residents with other voter registration designations. I'm your moderator tonight. Upper Noe Neighbors, a fellow neighborhood group, is co-hosting and represented by Chris Faust. So Chris, if you would like to wave.
Hello.
Activ8SF co-lead, Tita Bell, is also here with us. Tita, if you would like to say hi. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
So of note, although we're in District 8, Activ8 likes to open our forums, especially ones where citywide issues are discussed, to everyone in San Francisco who wants to submit questions for the panelists and to be informed. This is also being recorded, so people will be able to watch this at a later date. The focal panelists tonight are D8 Supervisors Rafael Mandelman, D8 Supervisor Hopeful Kate Stoia, and Corey Smith, Executive Director of the Housing Action Coalition. These panelists are housing experts. They'll be with us for the duration of the forum, the bulk of which is Q&A, incorporating questions people submitted. This is not a debate, though panelists might not always agree. It's meant to be a friendly conversation, so our D8 guests can get to know the supervisor candidates through their comments, and everyone can learn more about housing, a central topic in city politics and policy, and on the current ballot. I have 5 questions prepared with any and all focal panelists able to chime in. These might be modified or changed during the course of the conversation as things go naturally. And the last 10 to 15 minutes of the hour, no more than an hour and a half, I don't think we're gonna get that far out, but are an opportunity to explain and speak to the 3 housing propositions on the ballot. So that's on our ballot for November 8th, D, E, and M. I've asked Kate to cover Prop D, Rafael to cover Prop E, and a Prop M expert, Jay Chang, who will join us later to tell us about this proposition. Corey, you're welcome to stay for this portion. Chris and Tita may interject if they feel something really needs to be said during the course of the dialogue. Okay, and with this, let's get started.
Paulina, so Corey, could you introduce yourself and tell us, like, I see HAC, but not everyone might be, you know, aware of what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, the full name, which ended up on our email address, is way too long. So my name is Corey Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Action Coalition. We're a 25-ish now year-old nonprofit that advocates for more homes at all income levels, meaning supportive homeless, subsidized affordable, and market rate. We want to make it easier to build apartment buildings near trains and jobs.
Okay, and that's the same organization that Todd David is on, right?
Mm-hmm. He now works for me, and you can tell him that.
We're just trying to keep this local here, all right? So for everybody. Okay, so everybody can understand where we're coming from. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chris. This is exactly what I intended for you to do. So perfect.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm cooperating.
Yeah.
Anyway, but don't count on that. All right, so why don't we get going with a first question then? I just wanted to pull something right off the bat here, unless you had something you wanted to lead with, Paulina.
Sure. Well, I mean, I had a first question, which was
Why
why.
don't you go? Why don't you start it off then? Okay, and I'll jump in later.
Okay. So it is why is it so expensive to live here? Okay, that is the first question. Why is it so expensive to live here? A lot of people want to know. Okay, so out of Rafael, Corey, and Kate, who would like to jump in?
I would love to jump in.
Okay.
Hello. Just to start us off, and just I'll introduce myself. I can't see who is on the Zoom, so I know there are some people I know, and then some people will just probably be meeting me for the first time. And I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Kate Stoia. I've been a 30-year resident of District 8. And I'm a parent here. I'm a lawyer. I just finished a master's degree in public policy at UC Berkeley. I decided to get into this race in part because I have 3 kids, 2 biological kids and 1 foster kid. So my biological kids are 21 and 19. My foster kid is 17. None of them will be able to afford to live here. My house is worth too much money. I moved here first as a renter. I moved to San Francisco initially because it was a cheap place to live in comparison with where I was living, which was New York City. And over the years, the city has become more and more insanely expensive and unavailable. And I believe that this district, District 8, because it was Harvey Milk's district, has a special responsibility, not just to the city of San Francisco, but to the nation, to be a refuge and a place of hope and something that people who need the protections that San Francisco can offer, including gender affirming care for trans kids and a safe haven for families that have trans people in them, whether they're the children or the adults, LGBTQ people, and also women now in the age after Roe v. Wade was overturned, who are seeking reproductive care. San Francisco is a beacon of hope for all of these communities nationwide. And I think that the reason that housing is it's expensive to live here mostly because housing costs so much. It wasn't always that way. We have had a huge influx of tech money since I moved here in 1989. I've seen rises and falls with the tech money, but the fact is that faucet is not turning off anytime soon. We are in the location where many of the nation's powerhouses of economics are located close to us. Noe Valley and all of District 8 is located near the entrance to 280. So we are an appealing area for people that work in tech. And I think that we need to face the fact that we have a lot of demand for people. This is the attractive place to live for a variety of reasons, less so than it has been in the past, but for a variety of reasons. Even with this huge influx of people and workers from the tech industry, San Francisco has not kept up housing production. And we can get into why that is, but my basic point about what I think should be different in San Francisco is that we have a system of local control over what gets built and how it gets built, even down to design decisions about where doors go and where decks go. In my opinion, what we need to move towards is a system of as of right development where you have a width requirement, a height requirement, and these are like your maximum width, maximum height, maximum setback. And other than that, your neighbors and the Board of Supervisors and anybody else should not be weighing in on what's getting built on that property. The local control and the fact that people can appeal and make these housing developments so expensive, that's what's artificially restricting our supply here right now. That's what I would like to get rid of.
Okay. Would anybody else like to chime in on this question? And I mean, out of Rafael and Corey?
I will pipe in. So hello, Activ8SF and Upper Noe neighbors. Good to see lots of boxes, but some faces. Housing has been something that I've cared about for actually going back to grad school and law school. The world was very different back in the late 90s when I was studying housing policy. It's been something that I have worked in professionally before I was on the board of supervisors. I worked in law firms representing mostly affordable developers and local governments dealing with housing issues. And it has been something that I have focused on the Board of Supervisors. One of the things that I've done on the Board of Supervisors was actually use some of our add back funds that we get to spend on district priorities on a District 8 affordability strategy. District 8 experiences the same housing issues that the rest of San Francisco and the rest of California in some ways experience, but with a slightly different flavor. District 8 has had the second highest rate of no-fault evictions over as long as we've been measuring Ellis and OMI evictions, and yet has had relatively little new affordable housing production over the last 15 or 20 years. And that's for a couple of reasons. We have a lot of and have had a large stock of rent-controlled units, and there are tens of thousands of people in San Francisco who are only able to be here because they are in a rent-controlled unit. But when that unit gets acquired by someone who wants to TIC it or turn it into condos, those folks who may have been part of making the San Francisco that we know and love today get evicted and then have often nowhere to go because we don't have the affordable supply for them. And the market, as Kate has been saying, has not been producing at a rate that would be keeping prices reasonable. So I've worked as a member of the board and before I was on the board to try and get more money for subsidized affordable housing. I think in the short term, short to medium term, the prospects for folks who are low-income seniors, low-income families, we are nowhere near to being able to provide housing for these folks through the market, whatever changes we may be making going forward. And so we need to be subsidizing below market rate housing for those folks. Those are incidentally the areas where San Francisco has done, even though we're doing better than everywhere else in terms of how much money we're putting into this, we have not come close to meeting our RHNA allocation. That is, we'll talk more about that, but our regional housing needs allocation for moderate, below moderate income housing, we are not meeting the need there. But I am proud that we are moving forward with a very significant affordable development on Market Street that I've worked with the mayor on, that's going to produce close to 200 new units of affordable senior housing with a focus on queer seniors. Everybody's welcome, but we're going to try and get some of the queer seniors who are getting displaced into that pretty ambitious project. But even those 200 units, are going to be a tiny fraction of what we need. And I would agree with what Kate said. I mean, we had an explosion of job growth in the Bay Area beginning in the aughts. If things go well for the Bay Area, we're not going to stop producing new jobs, but the market has not produced the housing that we need, and we have not created the public subsidies that would allow for below market rate housing to meet the need. And so both sides of the equation are out of balance and not getting us where we need to be to keep people from being displaced and to house the new folks who are coming in.
So just to put a couple of numbers on kind of that job housing imbalance, and we very much look at this from a regional approach, not just San Francisco or District 8, which I think most folks do when you consider the housing market. Since 2000, we've created anywhere from 10 to 1 or 12 to 1 jobs for every new home. So for every 12 employees we bring in, many, especially on the peninsula, you're looking at 6-figure salaries for new employees. But even in San Francisco, the largest employer in the city is UCSF. Doctors are well paid, as they should be. Nurses are well ish paid, probably should bump a little more, right? But if for every 10 people we bring in, we only build one new home on a regional level, that's automatically just going to be out of whack. To Supervisor Mandelman's point about the lack of investment, that's also a really, really important deal. Coming out of World War II, the federal government was spending about 6 times as much money subsidizing housing for folks as we do today. And so if you look at just the federal investment and then at the state level, Governor Jerry Brown, who proposed a as of right bill, and the Housing Action Coalition firmly believes all infill housing should be built as of right, full stop, that's it. It died in the legislature, but at the same time, because he was not interested in that short-term solution, funding subsidized affordable housing, he was focusing on the big picture. We got rid of the redevelopment agency, which was one of the mechanisms that we use to subsidize affordable housing as that kind of short-term fix while we try to build our way out of it over decades. And I think being realistic, it will take decades for the region. I also did want to drop in a link here. We've got a video series with different educational tools for folks as well if they want to learn more and dive into any one of these individual topics. But absolutely agree with what both Kate and the supervisor said.
Can I just quickly chime in also on this? I think this issue of affordable housing and market rate housing is one of the key differences between Supervisor Mandelman and myself. And I think it's important just to, explain to people, because this is in part a forum that has to do with his tenure on the Board of Supervisors and my candidacy. Many developers in the city want to develop the housing that we need. And as Corey pointed out, we have a massive imbalance in what we need versus what we have. And my husband's a contractor. We have been super, super small scale developers, basically like moving into a house and renovating it, and if we can, adding a unit. So I've experienced the planning and the building department on a personal level for many years. It takes years and years to get these permits approved. And this is for big developments, and it's for really small developments. It could, even be for house renovations. People are just shocked when they experience this for the first time, how slow things move, how many voices come into this process. And I just want to really hone in on this, because in my opinion, it's not just that it slows things down, it's also that it leads to a massive amount of corruption. If anybody on this call has been following the news, they know that many, many people from the building and planning departments have been caught up in this corruption probe and net, and some of them are on their way to federal prison, and others will be eventually on their way to federal prison. That is because we have made a process where if you have the money, you can pay a permit expediter to help your permit make it through the building and planning departments. This is not a workable way to structure development of something that is this basic need. We can keep local control, but I just want to be super clear with people on this call that if we keep local control, what we keep is corruption. It's pay to play, as we have seen. It's letting basically rich property owners say that they love the idea of housing, but they don't want housing right next to them. They don't want density next to them. They don't want an apartment building next to them. And I think it's important to understand that we will not be able to deal with our homelessness problem in San Francisco if we don't build enough housing, and money for education and for affordable housing of the type that Supervisor Mandelman is talking about will also dry up from the state if we don't meet our allotted amount of housing that we need to build here in San Francisco. Yes, it's a regional problem. Many people want to live in a city, and this city has a responsibility to build housing so that we create a livable city where teachers can live, where firefighters can live, where nurses can live. And it's not just people who work in tech or doctors.
So Kate or anybody else, you just touched on this, the state mandate, right? Like you didn't give that number or the timeline. So what is that?
And I would like to interject for a moment, because there was a suggestion from, I think from my opponent that and this is true of some people in the city, that I support affordable housing as a solution, but that I don't believe that we need more market rate housing. And that is demonstrably untrue. And I have a record that shows that I don't believe that. And in fact, that I have tried to pursue market rate solutions, or at least to make it easier to build small and medium-sized market rate apartments throughout San Francisco. There are definitely socialists in San Francisco, and they're important, and they are on the Board of Supervisors, and they are in this Zoom some, but we don't have actually a representative of the more socialist viewpoint on this panel, which it is what it is. We are all, I think, to some degree, YIMBYs, to various extents. To Corey's point, I do want to reemphasize the significance of losing redevelopment back in 2011. I was a redevelopment lawyer. I helped redevelopment cities wind down their redevelopment agencies. Redevelopment was the largest source of affordable housing dollars in California until 2011. It was it ensured that San Francisco had funds to do a tremendous amount of affordable housing development through 2011. And the loss of that was terrible for affordable housing, both in terms of the direct money that was available for affordable housing. And then the other thing that redevelopment allowed cities in California to do was to invest in the infrastructure on which affordable and market rate development would get built. And one of the challenges affecting market rate developers right now is they have, since the demise of redevelopment, it is harder for them to figure out how to pay for the infrastructure costs underlying sometimes very significant market rate developments that do have significant infrastructure costs, but have to be borne by the projects themselves, rather than, as redevelopment allowed, collecting, borrowing basically against future property tax to pay for some of that infrastructure.
Okay, so again, this was great, but my little question got lost, I think, in the mix. What is the state mandate right now for San Francisco, and what is the timeline?
So San Francisco has to submit a housing element to the Department of Housing and Community Development, called HCD, to show how San Francisco is going to add 82,000 units over an 8-year period ending in 2032. Those 82,000 units are broken up by different income levels. It's based on this thing called area median income. Imagine you line up every San Franciscan left to right. The person by income, the person in the exact middle is 100% of the area median income. And so the RENA targets, is the shorthand, is we have to have a certain percentage of those at 4 different income levels where the sum total equals 82,000 units. And it's a process right now that is happening in San Francisco. I want to say November 15th, I believe, there will be a hearing at the San Francisco Board of Supervisors on the housing element. It's called by Supervisor Gordon Marr and Supervisor Melgar. And it is an active thing where San Francisco basically has to show its work as to how we're going to hit these very aggressive targets. One thing I do want to point out, one of the income brackets is basically looking at this kind of 100 to 120% of area median income, where we talk about the lack of financial tools. There is really no clear mechanism to build that type of housing. It is, I don't want to say impossible, but with the current system that we have, incredibly, incredibly challenging.
Yeah, and let me just chime in on that, because as I said before, I think there are a lot of developers who want to develop. And the fact is, there are so many roadblocks in the way. It's not just that it's hard to pencil out infrastructure costs. The thing that it's the hardest to pencil out is interminable delays in trying to get a project started. The delay is the problem. And it is frustrating to me to hear Supervisor Mandelman say that he's in favor of market rate development when he has voted against so much housing in this district. This district is 3rd from the bottom in housing production of the 11 districts in the city. All in all, during his entire tenure, 495 units have been created. That's over the past 4 years. We are nowhere near meeting our targets I mean, if you think about that in terms of the whole city, we are at the bottom, and other districts are up in the 2,000, 2,500, 2,700 level. District 8 is down at 495. And we have just talked about the fact that this is a desirable district to live in from the standpoint of commute to Silicon Valley. You've got a lot of people here. Supervisor Mandelman passed this limit on the sizes of our houses here and on the size of a single family house. To me, that is a red herring. It's totally irrelevant to what's going on, because we haven't made it any easier to develop bigger projects. It's the delay. The delay is the problem, and how expensive the delay is, that is the problem.
Right. Except that I have introduced, and now finally, well, I've passed a version at the full board that got vetoed by the mayor, and we have another version going through that the mayor says she will not veto, that will allow small and medium-sized apartments throughout San Francisco. I do think that the monster homes are not ideal. I think that developers are happy to build homes for billionaires. I think that converting a 1,200 or 1,400 square foot home into a 6,000 or 7,000 square foot home does nothing for the public good. And I think discouraging that kind of behavior and which, it's not horrible behavior, it's profit seeking, which, people do, but we should be using our laws to encourage the production of more smaller units, which is what I have tried to do.
So there's also a suggestion there that I have voted against housing in the district, and I cannot think of an instance where I have voted against housing in the district. I voted for thousands or tens of thousands of units citywide, and frankly, many projects go through without ever reaching the Board of Supervisors, most projects. So I don't think that I have been standing in the way of housing development in District 8. So, okay, on this relevant note, how are zoning rules changing in D8 and throughout the city and not changing, and should they not change? Well, the change that I am trying to shepherd through is an allowance of 4 plexes on lots throughout the city of up to 4 units, and then up to 6 units on corner lots. I think that's an important change. The other piece built into my legislation is allowing those new units to be sold as condos rather than rented, which has been a requirement for our ADU production. I think it makes it more likely that units will actually get built if there's some potential for the property owner to actually sell them off and recover the costs that they've put into adding a unit or two. But to Kate's point, there's also a broken approval process, both for projects that need discretionary approvals and for projects that are just trying to are moving from the point of they are approved. There are no more discretionary approvals, or there never were. Well, in most cases in San Francisco, there are discretionary approvals. But even once you get your discretionary approvals, you then go into this process of trying to pull your permits ostensibly in a ministerial environment where they're just supposed to be granted if you check the boxes. And yet somehow that process in San Francisco is longer than anywhere else in California. And I know that's something that, Corey works on every day. And I have had a few goes at trying to figure out what the Board of Supervisors can do to improve that. I think we need to fix many of these departments, and we can talk more about that because I'm sure you're going to ask.
You'll hear a couple of terms get thrown around, and these two things mean opposite things: ministerial versus discretionary. And it's very planning wonky, but understanding the two of these things is really key, especially when we have the ballot propositions later. Ministerial effectively means if you follow all the rules, it's yours. Discretionary means if you follow all the rules, it's yours as long as nobody else is pissed off about it. And if somebody else is pissed off about it, there may be a hearing or some sort of method to determine that. In San Francisco, the post-entitlement building process, which imagine, projects get introduced, there's conversations with communities, there's an entitlement process. In San Francisco, that most often ends with a planning commission hearing where you get your entitlements. Then you're an entitled project, and then you go and get your building permits from the Department of Building Inspection. If you get all of those, then you start construction and eventually people move in. That post-entitlement period Those building permits in San Francisco are a discretionary process. There's a project at 2550 Irving Street, which I believe is up to 6 or 7 lawsuits on their building permits. I talked to a project sponsor there, and he told me that about 30% of his time is being spent in court trying to just beat back these appeals on discretionary building permits. It adds a significant amount of time and cost to the process. And one of the reasons, I believe Joe Eskenazi quoted it, where it's like 900 days or something like that. And for anybody that's ever gone to the city to get a permit to do anything, ask yourself what that process was like, and then imagine magnifying that out to an 80-unit project and the amount of pressure on all of that that creates risk for an investor, right? Developers don't pay for new housing out of their pockets. They get money from banks. Banks don't lend if projects risk getting slowed down, because that delay reduces the probability of their returns, which therefore requires them to have a larger return, which adds to the overall cost of producing new housing. And so as much as we can move from discretionary to ministerial, that's going to create more certainty, reduce overall cost, and reduce the amount of time it takes to build things.
Let's see,
And
Chris.
just importantly, just to add on to that, it also reduces corruption, and it increases the sense of fairness and the sense that our government is actually working for us. Right now, I think for many San Franciscans, it feels like our government is actually working against us very, very often. I think people are feeling very frustrated with the provision of city services, including what Supervisor Mandelman is talking about and Corey's talking about. I mean, these, to me, that would have been a thing to work on 4 years ago versus, this idea about monster homes, which again, I'll just say, to me, is a complete red herring. I don't, that does not add to the provision of housing in San Francisco to me, to restrict the size of somebody's home.
All right. So,
Chris, yeah.
yeah, I just kind of want to turn this a little bit, because we can beat, flog that horse, all day long. But, we keep talking about we need to make more housing. We keep needing to make more housing, and it's absolutely true. And then, we need to put the people to work, and then we're talking about, well, but we want to build more housing, but we keep narrowing the pathways for people to get from one place to another. For instance, from this new housing to their job. Now, we created a number of slow streets, which had their purpose and may continue to have their purpose. So that's an issue that is not necessarily on the table here, but we do have two things. We have JFK Drive and we have the Great Highway on the ballot here. So in props I and J, prop I would restore both JFK and the Great Highway. And it's, for some reason, it seems too bad that those things weren't separated, because they seem to be. But both of those closures are pushing, the problem for people is pushing traffic from non-residential streets onto residential streets. Okay, so it's changing the quality of life for the people who live in near vicinity, or the people who just have to get from one place to another and are used to doing it in a way that is, going down a non-residential street that was well monitored, down to stop and go, stop, go, stop and go, screeching with kids and bicycles and all kinds of things running in between. So this doesn't seem to be like a well thought out way to do development, okay? Because you got to look at all the pieces here, not just build more housing. Certainly, so if we're going to keep on closing more streets, what are we going to do to make up for that? How are we going to make the situation better for people who just need to get from one place to another and live their lives? You want to talk about that a little?
So you raise, I think a very excellent point, Chris, which is that as we seek to add all of the housing that we need to add to impact price, we have to have the infrastructure to support that housing. And my biggest beef with the state of California right now is that although they are correctly demanding, I think that localities do a better job of producing more housing, I don't think that they are stepping up in the way that they should to ensure the infrastructure to move people around. It's not gonna work to add 82,000 more people or actually 82,000 more households and a lot more people than that if everybody's driving a car. We actually need fewer people that driving cars than are driving cars today. And the only way to make that work is to have excellent public transportation and other ways for people to get around that do not require everyone to own a car. I will put in a pitch for Proposition L on the ballot, which is the extension of the half-cent sales tax that we currently have in place, have had in place since 1989, and funds about $100 million of local funding for transit infrastructure projects, and then pulls down 4 to 7 times that from state and federal funding. But we have an underfunded public transportation system. We may have the best transit system on the West Coast. It is nowhere near what we need for the densities that we're talking about. And I think we have to be serious and honest about trying to create the infrastructure, transportation, firefighting services, parks, all the other stuff you need to support a denser, more urbanized San Francisco. And my biggest problem in selling Proposition L right now to donors for the campaign and to voters who are actually starting to vote is people are looking around at the transportation system that we have and some of the choices that we're making about trying to, make it easier to not be in your car and harder to be in your car. And people, are feeling like, come on, City Hall, you don't actually understand what it's like to try and get around in this city. That's the hard part. And we need to build we're simultaneously trying to add people and add the infrastructure. And we, at some point, have to figure out how to pay for the operations of an underfunded transit system.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like every time people talk, it's like we're listening to people whose transportation needs are getting from City Hall to a nearby residential area and back to City Hall and back to a nearby residential area. And those seem to be pretty well served, right? But not trying to get from the Richmond to Daly City, right?
Getting your kids to school and then getting to the job. And then there's the other thing you got to get.
That's the other thing too. What are we doing about the schools? I mean, we got people are still having to drive their kids to one side of town, the other side of town, just to, drive them to school. So, I mean, that's just it's not really a workable solution, but that's probably stretching the conversation a little bit here. Yeah, so Kate.
Yeah, thanks. I agree, Chris. And I think that this is a good conversation. And I think Supervisor Mandelman put it well. I mean, I think there is very often a disconnect between what the lived experience of San Franciscans is and kind of abstract policies. Yes, we would like people to use their cars less, but the fact is, unless you give us San Franciscans a way to move around that doesn't involve our cars, we're going to use cars. And then actually, I mean, I was having a conversation about this with Paulina about a week ago, and Paulina was like, I just like to drive and I enjoy using my car. And I think that's fair. I mean, we live in America and you're allowed to like to drive. I think that sometimes, Chris, we end up in this conversation that we're in now where the city government's failure to give us good workable options puts us as San Franciscans into this scarcity mindset. And there's a lot of talk in policy, school and policy planning about like an abundance mindset and a scarcity mindset. And I feel over the 30 years, I moved here from New York City. New York City has a great public transportation system and nobody needs to own a car there. In fact, owning a car is a huge pain, right? You have to move it for street cleaning and you barely ever use it. You can get everywhere you need to get on the subway or on the bus, and it's easy and it's fast. And I moved here, I could not understand how Muni and BART work together. And this was also in the late 80s where you could not Google anything. And, I immediately felt like I needed to get a car to move around the city. And I've lived here since 1989. I haven't seen significant improvement in the city's public transportation. And the thing that I think is important is I also don't see any kind of innovative mindset around this stuff. Now, some of you may have seen me out driving my stupid little electric golf cart around and like giving people rides and like tweeting about it. But the fact of the matter is that there are cities that are using ideas like that. I got that idea from Miami, that has a free circulating electric golf cart fleet of taxis in their commercial zone, where if you're in that zone, you can just flag one down and they'll take you where you need to go. Those don't pollute, you know, they can be solar powered, and you could do that in District 8 and beyond. Most trips that people take in an urban setting like San Francisco are under 3 miles. And we drive here because even a 3-mile trip can take you an hour and a half if you're trying to do it by bus. And frankly, buses can be very scary now. We have a big problem with unhoused people, with people who have drug and addiction problems. A lot of them are on Muni. As a small woman, it often feels unsafe for me to be in those settings, you know, quite frankly. And I think, you know, we have to address both things, and we need to have an innovative mindset, and we have to really understand that there are reasons. Okay, Paulina just likes to drive, yes, but there are reasons that are very practical that the rest of us are getting in our cars to get places.
Right, and I mean, I do enjoy driving. I also have practical reasons to drive, and then, you know, once in a while but I understand.
Now Paulina's feeling attacked.
I mean, it's all Paulina's fault is all I'm trying to say. No, but I think that we need, the other thing that I feel that we need to be doing as a city government, and that I wish that I had seen more of, not just in the past 4 years, but in the past 30 something years, is a forward-looking plan. You know, again, it's this scarcity mindset where the bikers are fighting with the car drivers, and we're fighting now over JFK, which by most accounts is, and including my own, is just a lovely place to spend time now. I think this is partly because nobody is saying to San Franciscans, okay, like, here is a great long-term plan for us. We're gonna, like European cities do, we're gonna close this street down and we're gonna create pedestrian areas, but we're gonna make sure that you have service, and this is how you're gonna get if you're disabled, if you have kids, if you are old and have trouble walking. Here are all the ways that we are going to proactively reach out to you and make sure that you can get to and from, in a timely fashion, where you want to be in the city. And instead of doing that, the city very often, I mean, to Chris's point with the slow streets, I really enjoy slow Sanchez, but I also understand the argument that this city is so reactive. City government is so constantly reactive to things instead of being proactive and planning, giving us a great vision for the future. What could we be?
Well, and Kate, you mentioned, you know, one of the reasons people might not want to use public transportation, but this is not just a transportation concern. I mean, like, this is a more broad concern about the homeless, right? So I would like to know, you know, like, when this housing is built, because it's not an if, we have this mandate, which we talked about. What needs to happen before, alongside, and or during this expansion to take serious steps toward no or few homeless in the streets? And I'm specifically talking about in the streets, and of course it also includes our public transportation.
I don't think homelessness can be solved without federal or state intervention and a significant increase in funding. I just do not believe it is possible because of the lack of the social safety net, which is needed in addition to housing. I don't know if the political will is there yet, but I think that is a significant piece to this.
I think that's definitely a piece, but I would encourage everybody on this call to go listen to last week's KQED forum about the differences between the way Boston and San Francisco are dealing with the homeless issue. Boston has on nightly about 3% of its unhoused population sleeping outside on the streets. And San Francisco has about 56% of its homeless population sleeping outside on the streets. That is a question of political will in Boston and coordination of services. I mean, we spend a lot of money for not very good results in this city.
Which is why I have spent much of my time on the Board of Supervisors trying to get San Francisco to commit to being a shelter for all city. And we, after a protracted 2-year argument at the board, finally passed earlier this year my legislation to get the city to begin to try to plan for and budget for being a shelter for all city. We're a long way away. Boston, I was in Boston last week talking to some of their business and political leaders. And they have on any given night 120 unsheltered homeless people that when they do their point in time count. We have 4,000 to 5,000 unsheltered homeless people. Their overall homeless population is about 3,000. Ours is about 8,000. So we have more of a homeless challenge than Boston does. But as Kate is saying, other cities have made a commitment to have shelter for anyone who's willing and able to take it. And other states have not abandoned the care of severely mentally ill people to the extent that California has. Everybody's heard my statistic, but it bears repeating. In the middle of the last century, the second largest line item in the California state budget was the provision of mental health care to indigent people through the state mental hospitals. We, as a state, before most of us were alive, started making decisions to dismantle that system and have never come up with an adequate replacement for it. So we don't have shelter for all. We don't have a safety net for people with severe mental illness and addiction. And then we have, if we had the kind of market rate housing of last resort that existed in this country in the 70s, where there had been mass outflow from the cities and housing wasn't, there was a lot of undesirable housing in the cities. And some people found housing of last resort even through market situations. We're so far away from that world right now that I think Corey is right. And, we have neither, as I said at the beginning, we're off on the market side and we're off on the subsidized government side. And that is a piece of this. But I also think we have to get the state, frankly, to re-engage around providing mental health care and ensuring a floor, because it can't be that San Francisco and LA counties are the places that provide mental health care for all of the severely mentally ill people in California. And it feels like that's kind of what we're doing. We're providing 11% of the conservatorships in the state of California. I'm the leading champion for more conservatorship on the Board of Supervisors, but that means that if your supervisor is successful, we're going to do 15% or 20% of California's conservatorships? That can't be the right answer.
I'll name names just to be clear. It was Governor Ronald Reagan who started to defund those mental health services, and then he got to the presidents in the White House, and then he decided to do it from a federal level for the subsidized.
But lots of Democrats have participated in this defunding as well. And there are, frankly, a lot of folks on the far left who think who would adamantly oppose anything that would coerce people into care, and certainly would oppose the reestablishment of even a single state mental hospital. I would implore the state government to create at least one state mental hospital so that we don't have people lingering in jail for more than a year who are incompetent to stand trial, which is our current situation.
Yeah, I'd just echo that. And I would encourage anyone on this call that is concerned about that to make sure that you reach out to your state officials as well. These problems, Boston's doing a way better job than us. Houston's doing a way better job than us. And so there's a lot of ways in which I think San Francisco could do better work on the homelessness issue. But it is also true that this is a statewide issue, and we should have statewide funds and federal action on all of these things. I mean, this is a human rights issue, right? Like this is a tragedy that we see when we walk on the streets. I mean, we've become, I think, a lot of us pretty inured to seeing it. And if for any of us to see, to kind of look with fresh eyes, even I live in Noe Valley. I mean, we're starting to get people living, here on the streets in Noe Valley, and it is heartbreaking. That's somebody's mom and somebody's child, somebody's brother and sister. And what we're doing is not right.
Hi, Supervisor Mandelman. I was very excited when your Place for All legislation passed. But like you say, it creates a timeline to make a plan, right? And you also said just now that we're a long ways away from seeing real change. So what's next after the plan is presented? Like, what's your vision for what the next step is? Because we've all seen this human tragedy unfold for a long time, and it seems to be escalating, right, as a result of the pandemic. And I would like to know, since you championed this legislation, what comes after the plan? And what can voters like ourselves be looking forward to or supporting if we're really concerned about trying to move the needle?
The plan sets up a decision for the mayor and the board of supervisors and the voters, really. We will see this plan for shelter for all at the end of this year. I don't know what the budget for that will be. It will certainly be far less than the amount that we currently spend on permanent supportive housing. And over the spring of next year, I think City Hall will be having a conversation about whether to put significantly more funds into shelter. Now, one of the things that constrains us is that Proposition C, which was passed back in 2018 and is a large source of our homelessness spending, mandates that we continue to spend significant dollars on permanent supportive housing, frankly, to the exclusion, and actually caps the amount that we can spend on shelter. I think it would make sense to revisit that Proposition C mandated allocation going forward, but that will be a battle royale, will be a very hard thing to do. But I think it is probably worth doing. If we don't do that, then we need to find some other sources, and we do have a $14 billion budget, so perhaps we can unlock some additional funds elsewhere in the budget to significantly expand shelter and to expand longer term placements for people with severe mental illness. We lose about 100 board and care placements every single year. We have been talking for the entire time that I have been on the Board of Supervisors, and for a lot longer than that, about our need for more places for people with who may need a lock on the door in a locked facility. We're actually moving in the wrong direction with things like the potential closure of Laguna Honda and the fact that Laguna Honda has not been accepting new patients now for many months as we try to deal with the issues that the federal government has the federal and state governments have identified. So there's some budgetary choices that we need to make. There's a built-in strong contingent, very activated in the city and represented on the Board of Supervisors, that does not want to see significant expansion of shelter spending, does not want to see any reduction in permanent supportive housing spending, and is not supportive of any of investing our mental health dollars in longer term placements for people who can't take care of themselves. They want voluntary services and they want permanent supportive housing. I think we need to do more in the way of locked placements and conservatorships and more in the way of shelter. And that's kind of the choice that we have to make, I think, over the next few years in terms of how we spend our budget. That's going to be something that groups like Activ8SF should be engaged in. Rescue SF is engaged in, and I think, and yes, the ACLU is against conservatorships, and I think they're wrong. Just checking in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some conversations with Rescue SF, so there's definitely more work to be done there. I think this has been a really great informational discussion, right? I do think that because it's 6:55, we will go probably a few minutes over, but I know that Kate has a hard stop at 7. So we do need to sort of shift. We're not closing this topic. We're just
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but Corey can easily speak to Prop D. I mean, he very easily can explain Prop D, which is
okay.
Yeah.
But we do have 5 minutes left, and if you're first up, Kate, so if you would like to speak to Prop D before you jump off, then that would be great, and then maybe Corey could add something. I do need to let the Zoom control person know that we need to promote Jay Chang to the panel right now. We could leave Corey on, but we do need to promote Jay.
Sure. And people, I think I think it might be better to have Corey just do the quick explanation, because I do have 4 minutes and I don't want to short shrift it. I will just say about Prop D, the reason I gave Paulina my long spiel about how I find the ballot proposition process really frustrating. Like a lot of San Francisco voters, we often have knockout propositions like we do coming up on this ballot with D and E. And I find that so frequently, both of them are called like the I love puppies proposition, and one will kill all the puppies and one will help all the puppies. And I think that, you know, this is a sign often of, again, this kind of like scarcity mindset that I was talking about earlier, and City Hall government not really doing its job to like meet the needs of San Franciscans. Prop D really briefly moves us in the direction of ministerial approval for projects if they meet certain requirements. And that's why I will be voting yes on it. And, you know, that's really all I can say. The more that we can move towards neutral decision-making on these issues of housing, and the less we can hear from neighbors who don't want an apartment building next to them when they used to have a dilapidated, falling down little cottage that took up a little piece of their lot and they liked it because, you know, either one old person lived there and there wasn't much traffic in and out, or they just liked it because they were used to it. You know, I feel like San Francisco is a city. It's a major American city. It needs to flex and grow to meet the needs that are presented to it now. And to me, Prop D is an important part of that. And the most important part of Prop D is that it has this ministerial aspect to it, where once you meet certain requirements, you're done and you can move forward with the project. And with that, thank you to everybody. I am sorry, but I do have a hard stop in 2 minutes, so I'll be quiet and I'll be on the Zoom for the next 2 minutes, but then I need to jump off. And for anybody that's interested, Supervisor Mandelman and I have a debate at the LGBTQ Center tomorrow at 6 p.m. Yeah.
Oh. Okay, thank you, Kate. Okay, so I know that we have, let's see, Corey. Can you just jump in a little bit and just give a little bit of the logistics on Prop D? And then I will actually, I was going to do Prop E, but I will skip over that for now and then go to Jay because he has to catch a flight or he has to leave at 7:10. So everybody's on like time issues, but we'll do it that way. Okay, so Corey.
I can be quick. I have the 60-second version and then in 2-minute intervals all the way to about 35 minutes. So actually Kate did a good job of putting it forward and kind of laying it out. The wonky way we say it is code compliant projects will be ministerially approved. This is 100% subsidized affordable projects. It is educator housing projects, and it is mixed income projects that also exceed some requirements. And it basically says that if you follow the zoning rules, the planning code, the building code, the setbacks, you pay all your fees, you do everything that the city asks you to do, you can build your building. There is no discretionary hearings at the San Francisco Board of Supervisors or the San Francisco Planning Commission. There are strong labor protections. Our labor partner, and just so folks know for pure bias, like I am part of the Yes on D campaign. I am very, very biased in this conversation. The labor requirements for Proposition D require prevailing wage, which is basically you got to pay people a living wage to actually build the housing that our people need. There's also healthcare requirements and apprenticeship requirements as well, with the intent of making sure that construction workers and their families have access to healthcare, as well as we're making sure that we build the next generation of construction workers to literally try to build our way out of this mess as a state over the next couple of decades. There's a competing measure that went onto the ballot, Proposition E, that was put on by 7 members of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors with some differing pieces to that. I will just say one simple piece to it. If you understand how housing works, if we're talking about the maximum number of homes built, the maximum number of subsidized affordable housing units, the maximum number of market rate housing units, it is unquestionable that Prop D will result in more housing based on how the laws are set up. And so it's going to be coming to voters. It was actually in everybody's mailbox right now. Proud to have the support of Habitat for Humanity, State Senator Scott Wiener, and Ortel Carpenters, and a variety of others, and Kate as well.
Awesome. All right, so let's skip over E and then go straight to M and then come back to E. So Jay, can you please explain Prop M and then kind of tell us a little bit of what you think about it?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you so much for having us. I apologize about my short time window here today. As you might have seen earlier, it's my son's bedtime, and that, as all parents know, is just utter chaos. So I really appreciate your patience with me. Proposition M was authored by Supervisor Dean Preston and the Democratic Socialists of America. It is a residential vacancy tax. It exempts condos, single-family homes, and duplexes. So it applies to all units in 3-unit buildings or more. If your unit is vacant for more than 6 months, the tax starts to apply to you, and you can pay anywhere between $2,500 to $20,000, depending on the size of your unit, how long it has been vacant, and what year it is. This is one of those taxes that is a solution looking for a problem. When it was first proposed, Supervisor Dean Preston said, there are 40,000 vacant units in San Francisco. This is astronomical, and we must do something about it. And when we started to look at those 40,000 units, we quickly learned that many of those units were vacant for legitimate reasons. They are vacant and undergoing renovation. They were vacant and on the market for rental. They were vacant and under the market for sale. And so out of those 40,000 units, Supervisor Dean Preston authored a piece of legislation that applied to just 4,000 units in the entire city, less than 2% of the city's entire housing inventory. And out of those 4,000 units, the city controller estimates that 250 units will be put back onto the market due to Proposition M. So why all this hoopla over 250 units back on the market? Why sell this as a housing panacea like Supervisor Dean Preston has when it does so little? And the easy answer is Supervisor Dean Preston needed something to run on this cycle. So he found a ballot measure that sounds good and feels good, and he tried to sell it to the public. But we know that the public's not buying it. That's why the San Francisco Chronicle endorsed no on Proposition M. That's why Mayor London Breed has come out and said no on Proposition M. That's why housing providers, homeowners, and renters are coming out and saying no on Proposition M, because it doesn't make any sense. And when something doesn't make sense, it doesn't deserve to be passed. Proposition M is the equivalent of a housing policy candy bar. It will make you feel good when you vote for it, but it is empty calories. And in the end of the day, it is just bad for your diet. And that's why we're saying no on Proposition M.
I love it. I love that analogy. That's great. Thank you so much, Jay. If you would like to hop off now, you may, and go take care of Avi and catch your flight and do what you need to do. But thank you again. And
thank you, Paulina.
And then Rafael, can you please talk about our last housing proposition on the local ballot, which is Proposition E? Explain it a little bit and then give us your perspective.
I can. I mean, as I said, we don't actually have all perspectives on the housing, sort of in San Francisco's housing debates reflected here, which may be fine. I did not support E, so it's a little bit odd for me to be describing it, but it was put on the ballot as the Board of Supervisors alternative to Prop D, which was sort of the mayor's and YIMBY's effort to address the housing crisis. And so Prop D does create a type of streamlining for certain kinds of projects, 100% affordable projects, educator housing projects, and then a type of mixed market rate affordable projects that have at least 30% affordable units in them. And what I said, and that is an improvement on Proposition D or E as it was originally proposed. As originally proposed, it was going to require, I think, 36 or 37% of the units to be affordable. what I was in the rules, I'm on the rules committee, and what I said to my colleagues on the board when Supervisor Chan proposed this was, I share some concerns about Proposition D. There are some things about it that wouldn't have been my first preference. It's kind of why I hate government by ballot measure. There isn't the opportunity to sort of fine tune and tinker and address concerns. And so I was hopeful that the board would take the opportunity of Proposition E to actually come up with a real alternative that I thought would, actually address our housing crisis. And I just, at the end of the day, don't think that Prop E does all that much in the real world, except to kill Prop D, which is seemingly the main point of it. Insofar as it streamlines 100% affordable projects, those are already streamlined in San Francisco through a state measure, SB 35. Every indication is that the legislature will renew that when it expires. So the need to sort of to enact this locally, it's not a terrible idea, but it feels like there's not enough there to be worth tanking what I think is a real effort to increase housing production in the city, which is Prop D. So that was my feeling. I was disappointed the board didn't come up with something more real. I thought there have been opportunities to do that. Supervisor Rafael proposed something back for the June ballot that my colleagues didn't want to really engage with. That might have been another way to approach streamlining that wouldn't have raised necessarily some of the labor concerns that Prop D does. So I just didn't feel comfortable signing on to E as an alternative to the mayor's measure, and that's why I voted against it. But it would be ideal to have E described by somebody who thinks it's great.
I did just drop in, the ballot simplification committee is a neutral, nonpartisan committee that does analysis on all of these ballot measures. It is a San Francisco process, if there ever was one. If you go to that URL, go to the final digest of each individual ballot measure, and you'll kind of get like a 2-pager explainer of each of them and what is supposed to be a relatively neutral piece. The supervisor mentioned the labor piece to us, and this is really, really a key difference between these two measures. And it actually is also sort of playing out on a state level with a bill, AB 2011. So generally speaking, there are kind of two factions in organized labor in the state of California right now. There are the carpenters union, who do more than just carpentry work. They do a variety of all of the other skilled trades. And then there is what we kind of colloquially call the MEPs, the mechanical, the electrical, and the plumbers unions. It's kind of every other union, more or less. And in terms of what sort of labor protections or labor standards each of those groups want, understanding this is key. The MEPs and then their kind of counterparts or coalitions in the California state building trades want something that is called skilled and trained labor requirements. It's effectively a certification that you have to get if in order you need skilled and trained. It is not the easiest thing to get, and there's a variety of kind of paths and reasons that individuals would not want to do that. So think of it as a little circle, right? Everybody in that circle is skilled and trained. The carpenters union advocates for prevailing wage. So everybody that is skilled and trained is also earns prevailing wage, but not everybody that earns prevailing wage is also skilled and trained. So when we're talking about the labor force, Proposition E, and I'll be partisan here, stands for extra hearings, is that smaller labor circle for mixed income and the educator housing. Conveniently, they did, and appropriately, they actually did make a prevailing wage requirement for the 100% affordable, because our thought is that there's a lack of construction workers. It's not necessarily an individual thought. There is a lack of construction workers in the state of California to build the housing that we need. And so having that larger labor pool is essential to actually build the housing that we need. There's other factors to it as it relates to factory built housing or modular housing that is part of this, but that's kind of broad brushstrokes. the divide that exists within the labor world. That is also playing out locally. The Northern California Carpenters are supporting our measure. The San Francisco Labor Council is supporting the competing measure.
Yeah, and then this is great. This is a great explanation, very informative, more than I knew about the props. And, that's the point of this forum for people that live in San Francisco that are not housing experts. As we see housing, some people feel is great. Some people are kind of on the edge. And then some people feel like, oh, this is kind of, wow, the city is changing. And certainly these propositions are not the only ways to address housing. I know that we're not going to do it right now, but I know that Supervisor Mandelman has other sort of avenues that he would like to see, that he has spoken to in the past. But with that being said, I would like to thank everybody for participating in tonight's forum. I would like to put in a plug for Activ8SF. So we dropped the link earlier. It's Activ8 with the number 8SF.com. And then Chris, if you would like to speak to Upper Noe Neighbors.
Upper Noe Neighbors. Well, this was in lieu of our October meeting, so we're pushing our next community meeting into November 16th, Wednesday at 7 p.m. And we are hoping to do a pre-holiday celebration live at the rec center. We'll see how it goes, because it's always, we plan for that and we default back to Zoom. It's nice to see everybody. Thank you all for your participation, and really great to see so many people join in. Yeah, I think this was a really useful forum. So thank you for organizing this, and we're happy to be participating. Never met you before, Corey, so you are just full of information, and so thank you for that, because really helpful to just have so much information at our fingertips. And of course, Supervisor Mandelman, as always, it's a pleasure to be chatting with you and learning from your great depth of experience in City Hall and in the roundabouts in the Noe Valley political circles. You know our community, so it's always nice to have somebody who's not speaking from like, oh yeah, I know what you guys were all about over there. It's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. All right, well, are we wrapping it up then?
Yes, this is the end. Thank you so
Okay.
much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye all.
Thank you.